morning, good afternoon, and good evening, depending on where in the world you're joining us from. Welcome to our expert panel from Black Box to Glass Box, Observability for Scalable AI Systems, brought to you by our friends at Monte Carlo, Revefi, and SAP. I'm Brian Mink, co-founder and president of Data Science Connect, the world's largest data and AI ecosystem for enterprise leaders. Today, we're excited to welcome hundreds of attendees from around the world to explore two critical pillars of scalable, trustworthy AI, data observability and AI observability. As AI systems become more complex, maintaining visibility into both the data and the models themselves isn't optional, it's foundational. This session dives into how observability helps teams detect issues early, trace failures across the data to model lifecycle, and build AI systems that are not only high performing, but also transparent and accountable. Our panel will share practical strategies for implementing observability frameworks that support consistent data quality, real-time. Whether you're scaling up AI initiatives or refining your existing stack, you'll walk away with proven methods for increasing visibility, reducing risk, and driving more reliable AI outcomes. We're honored to hear from a distinguished panel of experts today. Girish Bhatt, SVP at Revefi, Michael Segner, Product Marketing Manager at Monte Carlo, Sachin More, Director of Application Engineering at Dollar General, and Don Spalding, Senior Innovation Advisor at Verizon Business. Before we begin, a few housekeeping items. To make this feel a little more in person, we suggest you add a photo to your profile and include your bio, LinkedIn profile, and other information you want your fellow attendees to see. Next, please take advantage of the Q&A and chat features in the right side. We'll be addressing your questions throughout the webinar, so be sure to upvote the questions you'd like the panel to address. If you're wondering where your organization stands compared to others on your AI journey, check out the poll questions in the right sidebar. And finally, to learn more about how to leverage data and AI observability, check out the calls to action below throughout the webinar from our sponsors. Now, without further ado, excited to welcome our panel and kick things off. Welcome, guys.
Having us, Brian.
All right.
Afternoon.
Thank you. All right, well, we'll kick things off with some introductions. So we'll just go around the horn here and in the order you appear on my screen. So Michael, why don't you kick us off and give us a quick intro of yourself and your organization.
Yeah, Brian, I'm Michael Segner. I work in product strategy at Monte Carlo. We're the leader in data and AI observability. We help customers ensure their data and their AI outputs are reliable, as well as their data quality. And so in that capacity, I get to speak to data and AI teams every single day, talk to them about their challenges and their AI initiatives. So really excited to share some of those best practices with the audience today.
Excellent. Welcome, Michael. Sachin.
Yeah, my name is Sachin. I'm an engineering director at Dollar General. I'm mostly responsible for supply chain and merchandising operations. That's my primary responsibility. At the same time, I'm also leading AI for the supply chain and merchandising space. Thanks for having me here. I'm looking forward for a great discussion.
Thanks, Sachin. Welcome. Girish.
Sure. First of all, thanks, Brian and Data Science Connect for hosting this live session and bringing together the community. Always a big fan of this event. I'm Girish with Revefi. Revefi is a software product company, and we solve very complex and also the easy use cases related to data observability, data cost observability, and AI observability. Companies such as Verisk, AMD, Stanley Black & Decker have been using Revefi to reduce their data cost, spend data quality, and observe across their data ecosystems. For me personally, observability is something I've been doing for a long, long time. Got started with that during my NetScout days with network observability. Then I was at Splunk doing security and application observability. Then at Sumo Logic doing something very similar. And then data observability, and now AI observability. It's become the entire life cycle of observability so far for me. Looking forward to participating in today's panel.
Absolutely. Always a pleasure to have you, Girish. Don?
Yeah, thanks, Brian. Appreciate the opportunity to join the conversation today. I'm with the Verizon Business Group. I actually sit in our CX consulting services, work with our large enterprise customers, work across a wide range of industries. And as you would well imagine, a big part of the work that we do is really around the optimization and the tools and some of the things we'll be talking about today to really help drive better experiences for our enterprise clients.
Great. Welcome, Don. Great to have you again. So we'll kick things off by just getting clear on some definitions that will guide the rest of our conversation. So we're talking about two concepts today, data observability and AI observability, which are distinct but related concepts. So how would you guys define data observability and AI observability? Where do you see the overlap? Where do you see the differences? Sachin, why don't you start with that one?
Yeah, sure. Again, I come from more of a transactional background, so I've built solutions that have helped a lot of retailers across the globe, and now I'm part of Dollar General. So I think to differentiate between data observability and AI observability, right? So data is really about ensuring the health and reliability and the quality of the data, what your systems are carrying. And then to talk a little more on that, how fresh is your data? What's your volume? How does the schema look like? What is the quality of the data as well, right? Those are the main aspects of data observability. So you're really looking into those dimensions of data when you talk about data observability. Now, when you switch gear to the AI observability, you're really focusing on what is your AI ecosystem doing there, right? So what models are you doing? Is there a model drift that you see? Is there a bias, or is there a particular fairness that you're observing? It also talks about the performance metrics, right? So how well is your model doing when your data grows? Is your model degrading with the performance in terms of quality, is also in terms of the overall performance of the model? So those are the two, I would say, high level definitions of the two. Now, where do they really converge, or where's the critical overlap is where when data gets fed into the model that are running, and then it directly impacts the model performance. Now, again, to really define very simple convergence here is the data observability ensures the inputs are trustworthy, whereas AI observability is talking really about the outputs remain reliable. So that's the way I see these two converge at that point.
Yeah, it's a great synopsis, Sachin. Girish?
Right. Yeah. I mean, Sachin, you made it easy for all of us, right? Thank you for that comprehensive definition. I look at things pretty much in the similar lines. Data observability, I look at that as discipline of understanding the health of your data ecosystem. The roots were initially perhaps a little bit more unclear, but it's now gotten much more clear of what is data observability and how it's evolving. And I think Sachin made some great points there. And AI observability, the roots started with ML observability many years ago, and it never really got anywhere, right? So and I think AI observability takes the concepts of classic data observability and also application observability and extends that to the model and LLM ecosystem. But where there is a little bit of risk today is there's still a little bit of silo things. And also, if I were to put my data practitioner lens on, and AI observability tends to be at the model, what people would call downstream layer, and data observability is perhaps a little bit more upstream that way. But for me, when I look at it, there's a lot of confusion in the industry about what is this observability. If you look at what larger solution providers like Datadog or even the OpenAI or Anthropic are probably claiming to do observability, it's still siloed. That doesn't cut it anymore. And I think, like was mentioned previously, I look at the critical overlap as causality, and data is the common ground here. There's an overlap there, but again, if you don't do the data observability part that includes cost, quality, performance, AI observability will just fail. So that's the fascinating part of this emerging aspect of AI observability. And I really see, maybe perhaps I'm jumping ahead of myself, I see this all converging.
Yeah, that's a great point. Don, your thoughts?
Yeah, again, I'm going to probably echo the comments of some of the others, but it really in the end is about the health of your data, and really the quality. Is the data that you're ingesting reliable? Is it accurate? Is it complete? really trying to continually, in a real dynamic fashion, be able to make sure that as those data sources feed these models, that you really feel comfortable with the data. And then the AI observability is really about the performance. And I think it's hard to really separate the two in terms of how you really ensure the quality of both, because I do believe that the outputs that you see through an AI observability model really feeds some of the actions and the activities that you take as you are actually monitoring and really ensuring the quality of your data. So I really do see that it's kind of a more of like a cycle of feedback that basically moves from one model to the next. Though you can distinctly, I think, create schema that can separate the two in terms of where the data starts and where the applications and the platforms begin. I do believe that they're completely intertwined, and you do have to treat them, in the respect of really understanding how one affects the other.
Absolutely. Michael?
Yeah, I think convergence is the consensus and the name of the game that I think all the panelists have been talking about. And we see this with Monte Carlo as well. Bar Moses coined the term data observability, our co-founder, in 2019. And now we've abandoned the category, right? We call ourselves a data and AI observability platform. Because if we think about observability, how is it different than quality? Well, it's not just looking at the outputs, it's looking at all the components of a system. And data is an integral part of an AI system. And so oftentimes I get asked, well, do I start with data observability? Do I start with AI observability? And I think it really depends on where you are as an organization. There are some organizations that are just so far away from being able to start on their AI initiative. They're migrating systems, their house is a mess. Well, great, let's start with getting the data AI ready. But then there are folks that are putting out agents and they have a mandate to do 3 a month, 3 a quarter. They're great. Let's focus on making sure that those outputs are fit for use, and we can work our way backwards to the data. But I think the real big key here is that it's one system. I think that's kind of the point that all of our panelists have made, which is dead on.
Yeah, great point. One of the themes that we will be talking about today and continue to come back to is the concept of scale. And so as organizations, especially large enterprises, scale their AI adoption, why is AI observability so critical for them? And then conversely, what are the risks and pitfalls if they fail to have observability with respect to their data and AI? Girish, why don't you start with them?
Yeah, so for me, it goes back to the topic, Brian. We constructed this as black box to glass box. I would actually on the fly here reconstruct that as black box to transparent box or ecosystem, because for me it's the AI is great, and particularly with Gen AI, as we all have experienced, it's easy to start prototyping and get some quick results, quick wins. If you're prototyping something, it's great. It works great, and everyone is happy about that. But the reality is, if like we have a customer who's a large insurance provider, and for them, if their data is going to underwriting loans or routing supply chains, or even we have healthcare customers approving patients for care, if the black box approach is a liability, it's a regulator both from risk, compliance, and criticality, leading to disastrous outcomes. So I think that's where observability itself has become a little bit of a must to have, and learning from what we have had from other software systems, network infrastructure, and also from data is critical here. So for me, it's not so much about just doing things for sake of monitoring and having pretty dashboards, but it's the foundational capability. That's what we need to do. And scaling AI, you mentioned that it's an operational challenge. And as AI, as we are learning, initially it was a black box of some sort, and then we can talk about the performance and degradations and all those drift issues a little bit later on. The blind spots get very expensive if you don't know what's going on. And for me, fundamentally, what AI is more and more like a software system. aka it's a living system. It changes depending on the user, what you did few weeks ago or few months ago or days ago, and how people are using it. The conditions change, the data changes, the models evolve. So having observability is absolutely critical. And again, I'd encourage us to take it from a black box, from the glass box, instead of a glass box, a transparent box is how I would look at it.
Yeah, those are great points, Girish, particularly regarding the potential risks. Don, your thoughts?
Yeah, I think Grish hit on an important point there, where these are growing and morphing models, so they're not static. So you're really being able to tune in to these models and these systems is essential. Just to I think about a large budget airline carrier that we've worked with, and one of the things that someone within their chat bot basically had typed in, provide humorous responses on how do I prepare for X airline flight, and so the bot came back and basically responded, bring movies and things to entertain yourself because there's likely to be long delays and you'll be waiting a lot. Well, somehow or other that made its way into the FAQs, and so there's a lot of risk there if you're not super tuned in. And so those risks can range from the experiences that ultimately the outputs deliver to the cost, the GPU, the token usage, the ability to scale, and what it is that you really can develop as you start to create a hierarchy around the applications. So ultimately, it is it's a growing organism that you basically have to really maintain its health. Is probably the best way I would summarize it.
Yeah, very good point. Michael?
Yeah, I love that example, Don. And I think the key here is when you don't observe a system, things only go in one direction, right? No one comes back to a system they've ignored for 2 months, few weeks, and go, oh, wow, the system's gotten more reliable. It's gotten better, right? If you don't observe a system, there's only one direction it goes. It degrades over time, right? Monte Carlo has multiple agents in production with 30,000 users. And so here's an example of how we've monitored one of our own agents. It's called the monitoring agent. So what it does is it basically recommends data quality rules for users, right? Based on lineage, based on metadata, based on profile of the data. And we monitor this agent. And one of the things we found in terms of the outputs was that a workflow within this agent that was supposed to be recommending multi-field rules, field X should always be greater than field Y, things like that. Well, it was either not recommending any rules, or it was recommending very simple rules, valid rules that nobody would complain about, but not what we had asked our agent to do, not what it was instructed to do. And the only way that you can catch these things is by monitoring them. And so if we think about all right, what was the risk to Monte Carlo for something like this if we had monitored it? Well, eventually our feature becomes less valuable over time. There's less adoption, and we're not driving the value for our customers that we want, right? So there's reputational risk. There is bottom line risk. There is adoption risk, operational risk, the risk from our team's time. And so these risks are very real. And from our own firsthand experience, if you are not monitoring your agent, it's only a matter of time before it behaves in a way that you don't expect it to.
Yeah, great points, Michael. Sachin?
Yeah, I think all of you said enough about it, but my perspective on the scalable applications, or why it is important for when you scale the AI applications is, in my experience, a lot of times when we deploy the machine learning models for, let's say, forecasting or replenishment, a lot of times the customers always face the problem saying, hey, I don't know how you come to this conclusion. How do you say that this is my requirement for a particular distribution center, right? So, and as we scale to multiple different distribution center, it becomes a big challenge, right? So given that challenge of black box, to Girish's point, it is a black box from a business point of view. Now, unless we reveal what is going on inside, it's not going to have any trust on the system, right? So I think from my perspective, it's important that we have AI observability from the trust point of view, because a lot of the businesses today, they trust technology, but AI is still in the I would say at the edge, even though a lot has been said about AI, but there is still a bit of, I would say, hesitation to trust what it produces, right? So I think considering that challenge of trust per se, I think AI observability for the scale really is important.
Yeah, great points. So when we talk about building observability into systems, right? A lot of organizations are have current projects in the pipeline, and they're looking to, observability may be something they're looking at, but they might be focused more on short term than on sort of the long term sustainability of those systems, and maybe they're not designing with observability at the forefront, much in the same way that a lot of organizations are not necessarily designing with governance at the forefront. So how should organizations go about that when they're talking about building AI observability and data observability in from the start? What are some best practices there that you've seen, Don?
Yeah, I mean, I think you have to start the conversation with actually building it into the architecture of the systems and the models that you're creating. I think, by design, it's got to be inherently a component of everything that you develop. You want to be able to make sure that your models are, really able to look for some of the failure points in those models. You want to really have mechanisms that look for things like data drift. You want to be able to look at quality outputs. It really is essential that you're looking at, where are the breakdowns in the data and the integrity of the data, the infrastructure itself and how information and data is exchanged across the infrastructure. But I think that all really begins with an architectural discussion as to how are the mechanisms that provide the observability built in to the systems that you deploy. A lot of organizations kind of become reactive, so something goes wrong. And so we try to overlay mechanisms to be able to come back and try to prevent whatever went wrong from happening again. And that's much harder to do. So if you actually systemically create an ecosystem that is continuously taking feedback and monitoring some of those touch points that I just mentioned, I think you're really avoiding that, that knee-jerk reactive, I need to find layers to put over the top of it.
Yeah, great points. Michael, what are your thoughts on this?
Yeah, absolutely. I think that, like, who treats this as an afterthought, right? Who goes and puts it as an agent and doesn't think about observability? And the answer is a surprising amount of folks. What generally happens is it's very well tested in development. People are looking at their golden data sets. They are testing. They're looking at recall, all these things. But when it gets into production, they don't have the same level of observability or monitoring on it. And so I would say step one is make sure you have a plan for when you move from development into your pilot and production. And probably the very first step there is make sure you have an inference table, right? It's great to run LLM as judge. It's great to run these evaluations. It's great to have these monitorings. But before you can even do that, you need to make sure that you have your outputs and that telemetry and your trace information in your warehouse or your lakehouse right next to your inputs, and have an inference table so that you can have visibility into each of these steps and decision points that your agent is making and have that data. Monte Carlo, for example, has an SDK. I just put in the chat, free to use, in which you can start decorating your agent, making sure that each function is labeled correctly so that you have a very organized way to keep track of your spans and your trace information. To me, that's step one. Make sure you have an inference table and you have the information consolidated around your agent.
Yeah, I like breaking it down into steps and sort of here are the core things you need to do. I think that's a good way to go about it. Sachin, your thoughts?
Sorry, did you take my name?
Yes, Sachin.
Okay.
Yeah, building AI observability in from the start.
Right. I think I'll just step back a little bit before we get into the AI observability and why we should start from the beginning, right? So if you go back maybe 5-10 years ago, so when the SDLC was really introduced, we had a traditional waterfall, and then the agile came into play as well, right? But then if I look back, we would always write test cases before the development would start in a typical SDLC lifecycle. So for me, I see from the same lens, right? So start thinking about the observability when you're developing your, maybe it's an AI agent or maybe it's a data a machine learning model for your forecasting, right? So you're really thinking ahead of time before you start building your solution, right? So then you're really prepping up for the glass box or the transparent box we've been talking from the beginning, right? So I think that thought process is very, very important to get that confidence level from your business group, right? And the other thing I step into 2025 now is we need to have a compliance around some AI practices, right? Because if we do not do any kind of compliance or governance around what are we building and what we're trying to achieve, right? Then that kind of gets into a little bit of messy mode where we develop a solution, but then we don't know what that solution is doing, right? So again, hand in glove kind of situation. You define your framework from the beginning to say what LLMs are you going to use, what governance or best practices you're going to apply in your development. Then it becomes your, I would say, living thing. And as you develop your maybe machine learning models or AI agents, so the AI observability is kind of walking alongside with what you're trying to do, right? So that's my way of looking at how should we start from the beginning, than just wait too long to realize there's a problem later.
Yeah, great points, Girish.
Right, yeah, I mean, reflecting on what Sachin and Don said, I think the wrong way to do observability, whether it's AI or others, is to bolt it on after deployment, and then we're wondering what's going on, why is it happening. I think the right approach is to make observability a foundational layer, like what Don and Sachin highlighted. There's a lot of learnings here for us, and I mean, we don't need to redo everything which seems to be happening in any new area. Like, let's look at pipelines, for example. First of all, I look at observability as a critical infrastructure for AI. That is, you need to instrument all pipelines, feature stores, models, the inference endpoints. So you need to log metadata. Logging is something novel nowadays for LLMs, right? It's these are all common practice, best practice that's been happening for ages now. And apparently for AI, it's something relatively new. And it's appalling, right? So my point is, if you go ask an AI a researcher or others, what's an AI pipeline, their scope is very narrow. It rarely includes the data pipeline. Like, for example, at Revefi, everything we do is automated, whether it's pipeline creation, monitoring, observability, data cost optimization. It, Technology has evolved to a point where you don't need to do a lot of these things manually. You just need to have that as an architectural and fundamental layer so that it's available, and you can always, whether you use it or not is up to you. However, it should never be an afterthought. It should be built in from day zero, so to speak, so that when day one, when you're building out agents or others, the capability is there, which can leverage the foundational capability.
Yeah, I think that's a great point, Girish, about just how the evolution of AI has differed a bit from the evolution of data, and some of the things that are taken for granted as best practices in the realm of data, maybe not so much in the current reality of AI deployment. Stanley in the chat had a question of what are good benchmarks to know if your organization is completely ready when it comes to AI observability. And I'll open that to the floor, and maybe it's a little more complicated than that, it's not that you're ready or not ready, but maybe there's sort of good, better, best in terms of the types of practices that you could deploy with respect to AI observability. So what would you guys suggest as some benchmarks of, okay, this is sort of a base level where if you're deploying any model into production, these are sort of the must-haves, and then what are maybe some other things that you might want to have, might be some nice to haves from an observability standpoint. Anyone want to take that?
Yeah, go ahead. I'll weigh in after. Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, thanks, Don. Yeah, Brian, I would be just weighing really quick in that I think AI readiness is this concept of making, like, again, it's like, I'm going to look at just from a data perspective for the moment, like AI readiness from a data perspective. That's making sure your data is consolidated and AI can access it. That's making sure there's semantic, it's documented, there's knowledge around it, it's governed so that AI can understand it, it's compliant. And I think it's making sure that the data is reliable so that when AI accesses it, right, it's using the proper context. It's impossible for your agent to have the right output if the context or input it's given is incorrect, right? And so I would say from a data perspective, that's probably the dimensions of which to measure AI readiness. I think a simple one here is just thinking about your data downtime. What is the period of time? How many instances do you have from a data quality perspective? And how long does it take you to resolve those? Because that is the period of time in which agents could be accessing incorrect data. So that's potentially one benchmark I would suggest. There are many on the agent side, but from a readiness perspective, that would be my recommendation.
Yeah, and I think I would say avoid looking necessarily at the results or the outputs and start to look more around the frameworks and the mechanisms you have in place around your system. So, make sure that you have telemetry, make sure that the telemetry is, it's layered. You have telemetry layers at the data, the model, the business layer. Make sure that, you have gateways and guardrails between the users and the models. We talked a little bit. Gersh talked a little bit about logs. Versioning, lineage tracking. Make sure you have a process and mechanisms for that. Keep people in the feedback loops. Make sure that there's observability from the people responsible for the systems, and they're constantly interacting and engaged in it. Have the ability to test and be able to kind of sandbox and incubate certain aspects of your platforms and models. Make sure that if there are failures, that you have SLAs and other types of mechanisms in place, with vendor partners or any other responsible entities for supporting your models and your platforms. But for me, I think it's really more a matter of looking at a preventative framework to be sure that you have the confines around your systems to catch a problem before the problem happens. And of course, you can look at outputs. I mean, ultimately, that's what we're all striving for. And I think if you have all those different mechanisms of the framework in place, you're going to find that your outputs are going to be more desirable. So I would start there from my perspective.
Great point.
Yeah. So for me, I think it's a great question, by the way. We have talked about similar questions, but perhaps in different venues related to this. So for me, it's what's the driver? We talked about prototyping and opaqueness of AI models, that sort of thing. But for me, I go back to the basics. What are we trying to achieve? What's the business case? What's the use cases? What are you trying to achieve? And the technology part will always be there. As technologists, I'm also guilty of this. Sometimes I jump into the technology aspects of, hey, yeah, quality is important and all those things. But I like to start with, what are you trying to achieve? Do you have, and I think Sachin mentioned governance earlier. It's are you looking at AI holistically across of what you're trying to achieve? Is there clarity on the owners, the governance aspects, and the use cases? And then observability is more that I look at that as a technical foundation in many aspects for you to, and yes, you need concepts of data observability, model observability, security, governance, and also cost observability are critical things. So I wouldn't necessarily look at a roadmap right away, but I would look at what are you trying to achieve, how are you trying to do you have the cross-functional stakeholders, both business and technical folks, including the legal and compliance folks in the discussion, and use that as the framing to get to the maturity and the road mapping of observability within your organization.
I love that, Garish. And maybe I would add to that, if I could jump in, Brian, is that you can't understand without the business context, you can't understand what this agent is supposed to do. So you can't define when it's misbehaving or when it's putting in an output that's poor fit for use if you don't understand what good fit for use is, right? And so a lot of times jumping into the technology side of things before understanding what we're looking to achieve prevents us from being able to define, well, what does good look like? What does bad look like? When is this agent going off track? And that's critical for when you're thinking about your monitoring strategy.
Yeah, excellent points. Sachin, anything to add?
No, I think whatever John said and Grace said, right? Sorry, Don said, like log is a classic use case, I think, because whatever you do, if you can try and make everything transparent on the output side or on the computation side, if that can be transparent and can be captured, that really helps you understand what went into this black box or whatever the algorithm or agent that you're executing. That way, you are able to really reveal what went inside in getting to this final output. So that's a very, I would say, valid use case. Again, I'm talking from the 50 feet view where we can really see what's going on, right? So that's one example which is really close to what we have been doing as well, like keep things transparent. And there are other practices which I talked about, the compliance and maybe test driven development to make sure you're really looking at what you're trying to produce here, right? So what the outcome you're trying to achieve, so, and does it tie back to the outcome that you produced? Right? So those are a couple of things that come to my mind about how we start from the beginning.
Yeah, great points. One of the things we haven't spent a ton of time addressing yet is compliance, particularly with regulatory requirements. For every organization, it's things like GDPR, CCPA, and then of course there's even more restrictions for organizations in heavily regulated industries. So how do you guys see data and AI observability aligning with strategies for complying with regulatory requirements, and how do you bake in some of those requirements into your data and AI observability systems? Girish, you want to start with that one?
Yeah, sure. There is actually, this is a great question based on the attendee question as well. The one comment I wanted to make is this connects it to this question as well, is that there are all kinds of emerging AI regulations, and there's a little bit of what I would say geopolitical viewpoints on that, as to which country, whether it's the EU Act or the US's approach to that. Those tend to be work in progress, as we all know. So the point is, sometimes a lot of this AI Act that help establish frameworks tend to be more regulatory and compliance oriented. That's really the connective tissue here between the previous question and current question, because they tend to be more privacy focused as opposed to how do I roadmap my journey to AI observability. It's more of, hey, AI has this issues. Let's not go down that path. Okay, now jumping back to this. So I kind of interspersed my answer to this previously. I look at observability, and also within Revefi, we look at observability as a technical mechanism for deploying compliance. For me, like if I go back to my earlier days at Splunk, Sumo Logic, and a whole bunch of other companies, logs were what it was. Then it was traces. Then there are logs, metrics, traces, and others, right? And that continues to be the foundational of a lot of the compliance requirements. And also AI is also adopting standards like open telemetry. I remember 2021, 22, I was at Sumo. It was all rage. Open telemetry, because it is hard to get people to align with that. So what does it mean? Observability is definitely the foundation. I look at that as a foundation that helps enable regulatory requirements, whether it's EU Act, GDPR kind of thing. Mostly not only from logging for traceability perspective, but also post-market monitoring is how I look at it. You can look at the performance, you can look at the assessment of both quality, performance, and bias. So I know my colleagues on this panel will have some good answers. So for me, it's not just good engineering practice, it's critical to risk mitigation.
Yeah, great points, Don.
Yeah, being a part of a business that's highly regulated, we can both look internally as well as working with other highly regulated customers like our financial service institutions and things like that. So, so I think there's probably some commonality in terms of when you look at best practices around the governance and some of the compliance requirements. And so I think you really start with traceability, the ability to be able to link your data and your outcomes and be able to look at the inputs and basically understand how you can go back and trace how you came up with whatever you've come up with. I think there's fairness monitoring built in to the systems where you're looking for bias, whether or not there's representation in your data, and it's something that you feel there's no skews in terms of how your data is representing any kind of population or unique demographic. I think it's important to be able to mask PII, where that's appropriate. So data minimization, I think, is another best practice that we see. Controls around hallucinations, being able to, to really create scores and metrics to be able to have context, to be able to gauge, when there's problems with hallucination, or you're starting to see outputs that are not what really the metrics should call for. I think you want to be able to continually take, static snapshots of your results and some of your outputs to be able to compare time over time. So I see a lot of organizations being able to really look at longitudinal views of those outputs, and in the view of that, they sometimes are able to go back and rectify issues that I think would have a regulatory compliance type of concern. But then I think probably the most important thing that you really see is really keeping people in the loop, making sure that there's a lot of touch points and a lot of observability by the people responsible, for the systems, the data itself, as well as the systems and their outputs. So I think those are some things that I would say are some best practices as I see them across different highly regulated environments that we're working in.
Yeah, excellent points, Don. And Michael, I'm not seeing your video, but I think we can hear you. So I'm going to go ahead and talk, and we can maybe just refresh yourself before the next question.
Yeah, absolutely. I'll just mention this quickly. We have by the way, if in the chat, if you can see me, because I think my video is on, like, put in the chat if you can see me or not. Yeah, so we have a customer that is a financial services entity, and when they put out the wrong data point, the wrong model, like, they can temporarily tank currencies, right? And in Australia, where they do business, they actually have to report every single incorrect data point that's made, and then they have to do two things. They have to explain where in their systems it broke down. And they have to explain how they went and fixed it in a decent period of time, right? Every financial services organization within Australia has to comply to that. And I think we're going to see the same with AI. It's going to be, where in the chain did it break down, and how fast did you get fixed in a reasonable amount of time? Do you know what your systems are doing? I think we look at data regulations, AI regulations more broadly. Typically, compliance falls into those types of buckets. So that's where I think observability can really help.
Yeah, great points, Michael. And I'm getting confirmation that I don't think we can see you. So if you refresh the URL, you may be able to it may fix itself. Sachin, what are your thoughts on this?
Yeah, I think I again talk from the granular perspective. I can add a couple more points. So I think what I have seen in my experience is, when we talk about AI, everybody starts to get siloed in doing what they want to do. It could be a technology pick, it could be LLM pick, and then it kind of gets lost into non-compliance zone where everybody's doing their own thing. There's no common technology, there's no common practice. So I think, in my opinion, what we must do is we need to conduct some kind of technology audit, some kind of data audit to begin with, right? Before we really get too far into building something in AI. So a couple of things I would recommend is doing a data audit, just to make sure that your data is reliable, it's trustworthy. Then you could also think about bringing compliance into the workflow, right? So as part of your, I would say, I popularly call as architecture review board. At our journal, we use that something called ARB. So the architecture review board is part of the workflow, right? So they are reviewing whatever is going on, what technology you pick, what LLMs you pick, is it authorized or not, right? So that's another viewpoint I have about how do you formalize your workflow to make sure you are plugging in a kind of a governance committee as part of your development organization, right? Then selectivity of the tool, right? So when you select a tool, you obviously have to make sure that it is suiting your needs before you can sign off on that, right? So the adoption of the right tool is another area I think where I consider as a regulatory requirement, because many times we just rush and pick something and that doesn't work for you, and then you just repeat the same cycle over and again. So that's another concern, and I would say challenge that I have seen in the future when you pick something that is not fully reviewed. And then there are other couple of things that you can do is like train your team to make sure that they are following all the necessary steps before we pick a solution or before we design a solution. So those are a couple of things that I can think of when it comes to regulatory requirements.
Yeah, that's a great point, Sachin. One question we've got from Daphne in the chat, and this is a very good point about sort of the distinction between data observability and AI observability. And she says, hallucinations rarely arise from data issues alone. They often emerge from internal reasoning drift inside the model. Do any current observability tools measure cognitive stability of the model itself rather than just the data or the output? So I'll open that up to anyone who wants to answer it. But how do you guys, what have you seen in terms of dealing with observing model drift, for instance, with respect to AI models or other issues that may be outside of simply data observability, but address actually the AI models themselves?
I'll just give an opinion here. I'm always about converged world. That's why I mentioned that at the outset. So for me, I don't know, Brian, if you're going to discuss this. I think addressing the question also, drift is a huge issue. It's being solved selectively from a data observability or data quality perspective, but it's still very narrow. But concepts like concept drift, drift is something that's outside really the scope of data observability and others. So for me, it's drift is part. I look a critical part. It's like the weather system for an AI pipeline today. And what the question that was raised is exactly that. Yeah, you that's where the convergence between data observability, LLM tools, applications, and the underlying infrastructure layer and plus cost all needs to come together. And that's not that's still a work in progress from my perspective. I wish I could say, yes, it's all there. It's technology is evolving at such a massive at such a rapid pace, and it's still evolving. Yeah, so the question is very valid. I don't necessarily think data observability is a solution for that, and that shouldn't be the opinion from any of us, I guess, at least from my viewpoint. I think it's going to be a converged approach, working with the data platform providers, with the data observability, the cost aspect, as well as LLM. That's still a little bit of a work in progress. Otherwise, it will continue to be a little bit siloed, and your AI team should actually, perhaps the AI corporate team should bring it all together. That would be my current recommendation.
Yeah. Other thoughts for addressing model drift?
Yeah, I think what ends up happening a lot of times in the customers and prospects I speak to is that the model will change, right? So sometimes they'll have sub agents that are using maybe a smaller model and a larger orchestration agent that's maybe leveraging that bigger model. Typically, though, we see a lot of folks leveraging commercial models rather than these specialized fine-tuned models. I think that's because the space is changing so much that you don't want to spend too much time building this very bespoke, customized solution and then have everything kind of upend on you at once, right? And so when you're using some of these commercial models, you're not always in control of what those look like. So an example is there was a customer I was speaking to where Databricks updated their model, they upgraded it, and their outputs changed. Or someone changed one of their, I believe it was Anthropic, and they changed it for Facebook's Llama model, right? And so that output was impacted. I was talking to another organization in which they were subject from the recent upgrade from ChatGPT 4 to 4.5. And that kind of basically threw off their entire customer-facing AI agents for 2 to 3 days. So I think when it comes to like measuring the model in production, it's being able to measure what model is used for what workflow and making sure that you have the right size, right commercial model, right type. That's kind of the model drift that I see most common, which is a little bit less on like, is the model performing a little bit differently than it typically has, and more like just whole scale swap outs of the model. That's just kind of been my experience.
Yeah. So Michael, when Michael said that, it reminded me of something. Like within our Revefi product, we support Anthropic, OpenAI, Gemini, and a whole bunch of other models. So I mentioned this earlier as well at their event. So we were running some a real analysis with ChatGPT 4.5 and 5.0. 5.0. 5.0 was very chatty and it didn't quite get to the result in a timely fashion. And the results it was giving was like multi-step process. So that's because how the model has evolved over time. 5.1 has fixed a lot of those things, by the way. And then if I go back to Claude and then compare it, it's somewhat slightly different. So we look at this as we give you, you need to have the option. I shouldn't say about from a Revefi, but you as a consumer of AI, you should have the option of looking at comparing different models so that then you can decide what is best suited for your use case. That is, don't necessarily assume that the latest AI model you're getting from any of the LLMs is the right thing, or even a custom model, right? So you have to look at I strongly encourage you to evaluate that against previous and the current one as well, so that you need to get comfortable on on whether you're getting the right outcomes.
Great points.
Sorry, the other thing I would add, Brian, too, is that I think with model drift, a lot of times this happens in the embedding space, and we see like embedding drift. And again, it could be using a different or wrong model. Maybe there's the wrong number of vectors, or excuse me, or there's like a zero array, the wrong length of an array, right? These can often be problems. So having like being able to like make sure your embedding models are regularly kind of tested and making sure that they're not experiencing drift is probably a key important exercise to be doing regularly as well. And actually, I'm curious, I'm sure Sanjit could talk a little bit about that. I'm sure that's probably aspects that are happening as well, right?
Yeah, Sachin or John, do you guys have thoughts on model drift?
Again, I think just to kind of echo what I'm hearing from others is that I think it's still like a very reactive type of process to respond to. I think it's still your output based evaluation. I don't know of any great solution that's dynamic that basically works interchangeably to be able to monitor it. I think it is largely resting on, are your outputs basically what you need them to be or want them to be, and when they're not, then you got to start looking at the model and the data.
Yeah, I think it's the same thing. In my opinion, I think currently, at least, what I've seen is it's more of reactive approach than proactive. But obviously, we're trying to do something around anomaly detection, because a lot of it is coming from data. That is what at least I have seen in my past experience, as well as in some of the DG cases where we see the data did not make it on time. That kind of caused the effect on the model producing something which is drifted towards, I would say, towards data purely. But other than that, I have not used or seen any other model that can just detect that gap and give us side of time, right? So definitely there's appetite to do more proactive approach than just trying to react to what happens kind of aftermath, right? So that's my point of view.
Yeah, great points. Well, we got a couple minutes left, so I want to quickly wrap up with our lightning round, which would be just in one phrase or a couple. What is your top advice for enhancing AI observability at scale? Sachin, what's your key takeaway for our audience today?
Yeah, I think I would still stick to what I said during the discussion. Like, I think start early, think ahead of time. Obviously, I'm not going to recommend any particular tool, but I guess it's more on how you identify those gaps ahead of time and start thinking about it early. So that's my only piece of advice to, like, think big, start early, and then you really get to your finish line in the right fashion. So.
Good point. Michael?
Yeah, I would definitely agree with that. I would say get started. A lot of times people look at AI readiness as a gate rather than a goal. A lot of times folks have AI ready data that they can leverage into a very productive, helpful agents. Usually it's a customer facing data oftentimes. And so I would say one, get started. And then two, make sure you're defining, to Girish's point earlier, what is the outcome we're looking to produce from a business perspective, and what is an acceptable behavior from our agent in terms of operational metrics, latency, cost, token count, but also as well as output, right? And that's going to differ for every organization. It's going to differ for every agent. So just make sure you have that defined, and you'll be in good shape.
Good points. Girish, key takeaway?
Sure. I was reflecting on all our discussion from today. My view is that to build trustworthy AI products that solve real use cases, particularly with positive ROI, you must design in data observability, model observability, security observability, along with cost observability from day zero.
Yeah, very good point. Don, last word?
Yeah, Michael made reference to this too, and Girish mentioned it earlier. Have a very clear plan on what your desired outputs are, and when you're really clear on that, basically, make sure that you're building observability as a foundational principle in the architecture of the applications that you're building. Don't wait for it to become an add-on. If it's built in, then your AI is, it's going to be reliable and scalable, and you're not having to be in that reactive position.
Absolutely. Well, great insights from all of you. Really enjoyed the discussion. So I want to thank all of our panelists for joining us today, and thank everyone in the audience for being here as well. If you missed any of the webinar or want to rewatch anything, the recording will be available just a few minutes after this webinar concludes if you refresh the page. And we'll also send out a YouTube video on our YouTube channel tomorrow. So I want to say a special thank you again to our partners at Revefi, SAP, and Monte Carlo for making this great discussion possible. And we'll see all of you again next time. Thank you.
Thank you.
Great afternoon, everyone.